Hey everyone, welcome back. Sorry it's been so long since I released a video. Been really busy towards the end of the year just trying to get everything sorted. It's actually Sunday today, have a bit of time. Apologies if you hear the kids in the background. They're running around playing outside with water pistols and whatnot, and I'm in here being a nerd. Anyway, so this video is a little bit different to what I usually do, and this is because it's been what I've been working on a lot recently, but also I want to work towards the integration of VRA and automation, and this is containers and Kubernetes. So introducing that into, as I said, automation and VRA and amongst other things, but setting up and using what I refer to as WCP, or Workload Control Platform, which is the inbuilt Kubernetes in vSphere for vSphere 7, and that's where the containers and VMs are running side by side in a very simplified version there, and the ESXi hosts make up the worker nodes of the clusters, and there's some VMs that are provisioned to take up the role of the managers. Now, I've found that there's always been a lot of confusion with the Tanzu Kubernetes grid, and I think that's because there was a lot of name changes and there's a lot of options. Now, and this provides problems, obviously, when someone goes in to try and explain TKG. There's a lot of different versions. I think there's 5 or 6, and we've renamed old products like PKS into TKGI, and it's just so much choice, and it's all confusing, and I've never really seen a customer come out of a meeting fully understanding or even really getting. They're probably even more confused after they walked out than when they walked in, to be honest. Now, what I want to do is keep this very, very simple. I'll be talking about essentially 2 flavors here, and that's where I'm talking about vSphere with Tanzu, which is the built-in Kubernetes, as well as the ability to provision guest clusters. So we've got our Supervisor cluster, which is our WCP, Workload Control Plane. That's where we can run containers and VMs side by side, and the ESXi hosts are the worker nodes, and then the guest clusters is deployment of Tanzu Kubernetes grid in VMs on vSphere running in a separate cluster. Right, now you might be thinking, well, which one would I use and why would I use it? Now, there is a lot of collateral out there about that, but really at the end of the day, because the Supervisor cluster is running on ESXi, it's a lot more locked down, right? You can't install a lot of add-ons that you might typically normally would. It just runs containers. It just runs, you can attach your persistent volumes, and that's really it. Like, you can't really mess with it, and that's there for a purpose, obviously for security amongst other things. But if you wanted a bit more flexibility, the ability to be able to add your own your own admin level capability, services, whatnot, sidecars, whatever it might be, then that's where the guest cluster would come in, where you need that more flexibility to do what you want to do, or do what the developer wants to do. I personally always try and say, well, and this is something that I've just recently done, is all the admin, the management level capability, do that in WCP in the Supervisor cluster, and then we'll deploy guest clusters for each of the developer applications. Right, nice and simple. Anyway, so let's get into it, and I'm actually going to set it up on my cluster. Now, I did have this set up, but I've had to uninstall it because I had some issues in the cluster, so I sort of had to start fresh, and I thought I'd run through this again just to show you how easy it is to stand up. And I've actually had customers that have, they had 100 odd clusters within their environments, even more, and then literally overnight they had 100 something Kubernetes clusters, and they're actually starting to run container workloads. And these are ones from third parties where they're now supplying their applications instead of binaries and executables as containers to be able to run up, right? And this is something that it works very, very well with. All right, so let's have a look. When we're in vSphere here, let's have a look at here. We go to workload management, and let's enable it. So I've got NSXT installed here. Looks for compatible clusters. So this is a compatible cluster. Now note, to get a compatible cluster, you have to enable the vSphere 7 VDS across the cluster, and then obviously have, in my case, have NSX enabled as well. And let's go next. And hopefully there's nothing left over. Alright, so number of pods, 1,000. Yeah, look, I'm not going to be running any more than that in my lab, so let's just go tiny for now. Let's have a look at the networks. So, yep, I did set up a network for this. I think it was K8's management. Subnet mask 10.60.20.0/24. Oh, sorry, my bad. That was a bit easier, that one. Starting IP address 10.60.20.20. Gateway 10.60.20.1. DNS server 10.0.0.40. NTP server. I wonder if I can. I've got to use an IP address. Okay. 192. Got to remember all these things in my head here. Search domain, so I'll use my lab domain there. Alright. And VDS, so I'll select iSCSI. Now it's just called iSCSI. That's probably confusing because it used to be my iSCSI network, which isn't anymore, but I'm just laziness and haven't renamed it. Check the edge cluster, so I've only got one. No, that's alright. DNS server. 240. I'm just going to leave these alone, the pod siders. And the ingress. And egress. Alright. Cool. Next on that. Storage. So I'm just going to use the same storage across all now. I'll use just vSAN default. I'm not going to use anything special here. Obviously you could, but for my lab I'm not. Alright, cool, next. Alright, so hopefully, let's just confirm, I think that's okay. Hopefully everything tidied up from when I had to remove it. Let's submit that. Now that should start building the supervisor clusters. Alright, so it's installing the agents on the hosts. It's now deploying the supervisor clusters, downloading a bunch of stuff, updating vSAN configuration. Cool. So just wait till all this finishes. And all this should be automatic. I haven't had to download anything to get this to work. Now to get the guest clusters, which is the TKG services, to deploy guest Kubernetes clusters, so Kubernetes clusters in VMs. They do require content library, so let's have a look at that while we're waiting for this. So in TKG, there's a subscription URL. Now, if you don't have internet access, and I just did this recently at a customer site, which is why I haven't released a video in ages, because I've been stuck in doing some pretty massive deployments of this, is you can download the OVAs and upload them essentially. Or here they are. And the photons, and you can just upload the images that you want or the versions that you want. I just uploaded the 2 latest ones, but obviously, you know, this using the subscription will actually keep them up to date. It will constantly download only if you've got access to the internet. Alright, so we'll just wait till these installs are done, and through the magic of video editing, we should be there soon. Okay, so once it's started all the services on my lab, it takes a little bit of time, but it's, you know, it doesn't restart the host or anything, so it can be done live. Obviously on proper enterprise level kit, it's going to go a bit faster than what it did in my lab, but it should be all good now. Hopefully it's all running. So each of the hosts are worker nodes. We've got our control plane here. If we go back to workload management, cool, we've successfully enabled it. That's great. First thing we need to do is create a namespace. Now this is where it's really cool, is we can create a namespace, and this is a supervisor namespace, and then we can give people permission. We can set resource constraints just like you would with a resource pool, I guess you can say. And what's also awesome is that you can then start enabling self-service Kubernetes. So you can, using vSphere, essentially using AD users through vSphere, you can assign people access to a namespace to be able to create, and they could then create guest clusters so that they can then further, you know, use the resources within that environment. And then obviously the big thing here is I hear a lot of people, when would I use workload control plane over a guest cluster, a TKG guest cluster? And really, I actually think there's a thing online about it, but essentially, look, I reckon the supervisor cluster, you know, should really be used if you just want to be able to run things up nice and easily, that you don't need to add any additional things onto the side of Kubernetes. You don't need to modify anything too much, because it is very, very locked down, and it's for specific reasons, security and otherwise. So if you wanted to start actually having a bit more flexibility in the packages and other things that you run, if you want direct access to the Kubernetes cluster at the, you know, at the admin type level, then use a guest cluster, right? So there's, you know, pros and cons of either, but really what I'm going to focus on now is just the actual inbuilt WCP before we go to deploying guest clusters. So first off, we need a namespace. So let's create a namespace. I'm going to create it in the supervisor cluster here, a name. So yeah, so I just want to call this one dev, right? Okay, great, cool. So the namespace, so yep, as it says here, you can choose a bunch of stuff. I've just got it. Alright, so we've got the dev namespace. We've got no permissions yet. Let's add permissions. So obviously you can add a whole bunch, but I'm going to add my AD. So this is automatically integrated with Active Directory through vCenter. So I'm going to look for me. So there it is. And I want to give it a role. So I want to edit role for me. And we can also add more. We could add a group. So let's look at adding a group. So I might do VRA admins. Let's have a look. Admins. Forgotten. There we go. VRA admins, and they can be edited as well. Alright, cool. So that's all there. Let's storage. So dev, let's do the vSAN storage policy. So this is where you can actually set the storage policy that you want this namespace to be able to use. And there we go. So we've got our, we'll edit some limits too. So let's add storage, let's change it to gigabyte. I want to give a 40 gigabyte limit. Memory, let's just say we can use 10 gigabyte there, and CPU is fine, right? So there we go. I've got my guardrails around the namespace. Now let's actually connect and get working with it. So I've already got. Alright, so here's something I prepared earlier. So I do Node-RED, and I'd use it for home automation all the time. So first we need to log in. So I log in using my credentials. There we go. So we can see that I've got access to the following contexts. So let's switch to dev. So, all right, cool. Now let's just deploy. So let's deploy Node-RED. All right. Cool. So we'll see that these start getting placed in. So these were when I was doing it before, and the alright. So we see here, Node-RED's deployed. So we've got one container, namespace dev, we can see the storage it's using. And while this is actually loading up, we can still have a look. Let's do like get pods. Alright, cool, so that's running. Now we need a load balancer obviously to be able to connect to this. So let's do that. Alright, so let's now have a look. Get services. Alright, there we go. So this is all handled via NSX obviously in there. So that's my external IP that's been given to me, and it's doing 80 to, well, let's see if I can get to it. Oh, that is not. Oh, there we go. Node-RED up and running. So obviously that's, you know, we could delete that. I'll show you that I'm not faking anything here. I can try and get that, but you're not there. Cool. Yep, can't get to it. Let's put it back. It's probably going to have the same one, same IP address. Don't know, let's have a look. Oh, no, it's .3. Oh, good. Sweet. So, that's all working. Let's try something else. Let's do... actually, let's do SonarCube. So let's do a persistent volume request. So let's PV. See that? So if we go over here, we'll see that it's actually creating virtual disk objects and updating container info. Now, if we go to this namespace here, we can see that we've got one persistent volume claim. And if we go to storage and persistent volume claims, there it is. So we can go all the way. If you start clicking on these, it'll actually take you to where it is, the data store. If you want to have a look at, and the placement details in there under vSAN. So what, I guess this is the best way to show that, you know, while I'm working and a developer is working in Kubernetes, from a VMware admin point of view, security, operations, I can see what's going on, right? So I can see the storage, I can see the capacity that it's using, I can see, like, apply the storage policies, I can see the compute, you know, the pods that are running there. There's a Node-RED pod with one container. We can see the deployment, so that's the Node-RED deployment that I put up. I've got no replica sets because they're, except for the Node-RED one with one, and no stateful sets there. And you can just start, you know, you can see how this is all working. I can see the permissions, I can add permissions into the namespace, I can configure it all. I can then monitor, so I can see what's going here. So I can see that the persistent storage volume was claimed. I can see the Node-RED load balancer when I created it, and it's using the NSX NCP, right? And any vCenter events that are associated with that as well. And then obviously the summary. So I can see there's no Tanzu Kubernetes yet, but we can add a library here. So I will show this. So this is how we add my TKG library there. Cool. So as you can see here under the cluster name configure, you've got all these. You got the image registry, which I haven't enabled Harbor, but you can. You got the certificates. You got any storage and items, which I don't yet. You can see your network configurations and general configurations there. Need to click properly. In general, you can see, you know, the size that I chose and now the content library that I associated with it, right? So now I want to go back to here, and I've created that persistent volume. Now let's actually deploy SonarQube YAML, and that's going to create, and you can see there's a SonarQube. It's going to attach the virtual disk that is the persistent volume that I want. And that should be up and running. Let's have a look. So that's still starting up. And alright, so it's waiting for image to pull down. I'm very impatient. So there you go, it's running now. Alright, so this should have an IP address as well. Let's look at the services. Alright, so there's my SonarQube load balancer. Okay, it's using the .2. Oh, and that will be, I think it's 9,000. Yeah. And so SonarQube's still starting in the back end. But if we actually go into vSphere again, in here, networks. So this is where you'll see the load balancers, right? So load balancers, and if you're using egress and the endpoints, says there's the services. I'm not using egress. I was using load balancers instead. But look, that I think it's admin. Admin is the default. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's all working. So technically, now if I was to old password, new password, Cool. Don't save. Now, technically, if I've done that properly, I should actually be able to delete. Yep. So we'll see it shut down, it will disappear. Awesome. Now let's just do that again. And it should connect it to the same persistent volume and not need me to reset the password when it comes in. Though I haven't tested this, so if it doesn't work, it's not my fault. Alright, let's see when it's ready. Oh, it's running. Oh, let's just make sure it's still the same. It's .4. Okay, let's go .4. Woohoo! All right. There you go. Cool. So all good. So that's just a nice quick introduction to workload control plane. Now you can already see, look, this is a pod with one container running in it. This is a pod with one container running in it. From a VMware admin point of view, I can see what it's using. I can see the memory. I can see the storage. I can monitor it just like I can any other virtual machine. And yeah, like this is the real value that allows to see, you know, virtual machines and containers running side by side, and there's no difference in how I operate this, right? In fact, it's very, as you said, it's very, very easy for me to add the permissions to it, to be able to assign limits, and then just hand that over to a developer, right? So next video, we'll cover guest clusters, which is a TKG running in virtual machines, but they run within the supervisor namespace, so they inherit the same permissions. So if I was to deploy a guest cluster in this dev, I would be able to manage and administer that guest cluster by myself, but I'm still constrained by the supervisor namespace permissions, constructs, and limits, right? So next time, that's what we'll cover. Until then, stay safe, have fun, enjoy, see you, bye.